Welcome back. It's Beyond the Box, the second edition. For those who are joining us for the first time, you know that on Monday we feel like Jacob and I, we can't get in everything we want to. So on Thursday, well, today's Thursday, but we might be changing the date. We do a part 2, and lately we've been running through some of the classic OGs from Fantasy Football Today. Today we have on the OG from Fantasy Football Today, or at least according to my knowledge, the OG from Fantasy Football Today. It's Jamey Eisenberg. Jamey, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, guys. It's a pleasure. I think Dave's actually the OG. Dave's been around.
I wasn't sure about that. Who got there first, you or Dave? I don't know why I thought it was you for some reason.
No, Dave was there. Dave's been with the company a few years before I got there, and he was, I believe, in the fantasy department a year before I was there.
Well, I apologize to Dave if he's listening. And Dave's not only an OG, he actually is somebody who can play through pain and play through what in the fantasy football analyst world we would call an injury. For those who don't know, check out yesterday's episode on Fantasy Football Today when Dave was blinded by the light in the sun and still made it through and powered through with analysis. That was an excellent moment in Fantasy Football Today.
It was the whole thing. I don't know if, Jacob, you've seen it yet, but
no idea.
So Dave is talking about the sun situation in Dallas, and all of a sudden it's like he hit a filter on his camera, and it went like almost white, and it looked like smoke. We got some jokes about what Dave might have been doing, hot boxing or whatever, but it was the timing could not have been better. And then he tried to like move his camera and adjust, and anybody that follows our shows, when I get the giggles, I get the giggles, and I couldn't stop laughing. And he's just giving great analysis about something. I don't even know what he was talking about. And I was just laughing my way through it.
So it wasn't planned. I thought it was like
what? It was not planned. No,
it was not planned. It was
natural. Like if you look at Dan, you're watching us now. Like in the corner of Dan's shot, there's like the sunlight's coming through. It's as if this entire screen was exactly like what's going on in the corner of Dan's shot.
So good. And the funniest part about it for me was finding out later in a meeting we had for Fantasy Football Today that Adam had never heard the term hot boxing before, which is just unbelievable that Adam has lived this many years. But we're not here to reminisce too much on yesterday, but I do want to start, Jamey, by talking with you a little bit about your journey through the fantasy football world. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, from when you started here to where you are now, what's been the biggest change, do you think, in the fantasy football industry?
Oh, shows like this. Biggest thing is, the analytics and, just how people view not only the advice that we give, how you guys, as an audience, consume it. And, I always find, which is, something I try to stay true to my core, as an analyst, because I have peers, my own age group, which is, mid to late 40s. And now kids, my oldest son is 12, but my, cousins that have children and, I just spoke at a high school class, earlier this week. And, the smartest fantasy player and the novice fantasy player, I always find it's the same thing. They want to know how the sausage gets made, but really at the end of the day, they just want to know, who do I start and who do I sit? And, you can present it in so many different ways, but with the way people consume things these days, it's still, they just want to know, do I start that guy or do I sit that guy? So it's like Jacob's fantastic at what he does. I'd be hard pressed to find anybody better who breaks down games from a number standpoint than you do, Jacob. And I'm sure, you can say 75 different things about a player, and the person that you're saying it to will digest all of that and then just say, okay, do I start him or do I set him? And that's, the thing is still, I think, the best part about what we do is, like, you're trying to dress it up and make it where the smart fantasy player, and that's, I think, our audience is better than anybody's. And why, we get critiqued about some of the things sometimes when on our show, not so much this show, because this is what you guys do, about not necessarily coming with hard hitting data all the time. But I really think the people just, tell me who to start, who to sit, who to pick up, who to drop. And that's the core of it. But in terms of what's changed, it's definitely been the analytics, no doubt about it. It was a lot of just, start him. Why? I like him. And if you don't say why now, people are going to send you up.
But it's interesting too, because the why doesn't always have to be analytics. And I think we've gone over that with some of our guests. And I know you agree with that too. And I think some of the core of fantasy, the why at least, is figuring out matchups, figuring out, and then those aren't always to do with analytics, figuring out situations and how those play out, game script, things like that, that dive a little bit into other things. And I think you do an excellent job of that in your start sit column. And it's a big reason. Yeah. And it's a big reason why the start of the weeks have been so successful.
I think, for me, it's a lot of the intangibles. Heath and I were not arguing about this. It was a fun conversation of, I deal in a lot of hope and expectations, and Heath is a very black and white, factual person. So we were talking about Dawson Knox, for example, and Heath is going to say Dalton Kincaid is tight end. I'm going to go verbatim, which is not always something I do. He said he's tight end 19 on the season. Of course, Dalton Kincaid has not had a great year, but this is now a great matchup. You have potentially 2 of the top 3 wide receivers missing if Amari Cooper joins Keon Coleman on the sideline. And how is Josh Allen going to get his numbers? Well, somebody's going to have to catch passes. It could be Mac Hollins as a big tight end, or a small tight end, big receiver. It could be Khalil Shakir. It could be a Ray Davis 63-yard touchdown that somehow he scores that way. I just think it's a good opportunity for Dalton Knox. So I'm dealing in the hope of him stepping into this role, and the hope of him getting those 6 or 7 targets per game, and the hope of him taking advantage of a bad matchup. Heath is like, no, I don't buy it. So that's everybody's process is different.
Yeah, 100% true. Speaking of process, I like to ask this question to our guests, especially you, because you've been with this company for a while and you've been doing this for a while. So you've had a lot of experience in the industry. How has your strategy changed the most, do you think, over time as a fantasy analyst?
A lot of it is time spent doing this. I used to, every offseason, I sent emails to every team requesting interviews of all players I thought were going to be of note to fantasy players. My background is in journalism. I like to stay true to that as much as I can. I like to go to Pro Bowl when I can go. I like to go to, I have a couple trainers that I know, try to visit them when they have players in town and just talk to them about guys. I try to stay in touch with the teams that I know and, my peers that, still cover the NFL, and reach out to them. There's just not the time to do that anymore, so to still though find the opportunities though to reach out to those type of situations to get information. It's just the time spent to do it. We're just pulled in so many different directions. Before, when I first started doing this, it was just you're just writing. We did occasional videos. We started doing our podcast maybe like 2007, 2008, 2008 I think it was. But in the beginning, it was. I remember I called the Vikings. This is just tells you how different things are. I called the Vikings. I asked the Vikings to speak to Adrian Peterson his rookie season. They said sure. So I speak to Peterson. It's the week that he got his first NFL start. So I don't think I broke that news, but I certainly put it out there. Hey, Adrian Peterson is starting his first game. And, Roto World picks that up, all those things that, used to happen back in the day. I wish I could sit here and call teams. I used to. So when I covered the Dolphins, I think they still do this. You get like a 10-minute phone call with the opposing coach and opposing player. So when I first got the job here, I'm like, why would I not take advantage of that? I would drive down to the Dolphins every Wednesday, and I would listen to the opposing coach, because now I'm getting Dolphins players of interest for fantasy players, and now I'm getting at least one opposing coach and one opposing player. So I would do an article a week on just Dolphins are playing the Patriots. You're Belichick. Well, bad example. Dolphins are playing the Jets. Rex Ryan said this, and maybe Mark Sanchez, maybe Curtis Martin. I'm dating myself. I forget the running. Thomas Jones. Whoever it may be. And I can never do that anymore. I never have the time to do that anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because it's the time is a factor, but it's also kind of just the novelty of it, right? Like fantasy used to be so different in my mind playing it as a player before I even got into this industry, because things like you just said, like you could literally have news like that that's essentially broken and really changes the entire fantasy slate, Peterson starting in that example, now that information is all available to everyone. There used to be edges found in just having information that now is available to everyone.
Yep.
So it's like we talked about earlier, you find the analytics, there's different ways to find different edges, but that edge is not necessarily there, but you still can find some edges. Like you do content in the off season that I really like, Jamey, when you're at the owners meetings and things like that, where you get quotes and you get actionable information. And I've looked back at some of it sometimes during the years, just like looking through stuff for content's sake and seeing like how things did performance wise. And I'm looking at some of these quotes and I'm like, well, this ended up playing out the way that it was said 6-7 months ago.
Yep.
When like, I think I can't remember one of them that was, I think maybe James Cook. There was one that was just like stood out to me. And I was like, but it was maybe buried in off-season content, but it was actionable information that you can still find from talking with these coaches. So I think there's still value in that, but it is interesting how much things have changed and what people are looking for now. Jacob, I know you haven't talking a lot. Let's take a quick. It says I wanted to talk a little bit with Jamey and get involved and get a little bit of insight into his journey.
I just wanted to say that's all super cool. Like, thank you for sharing those anecdotes. We're gonna get into some actionable stuff here for week 11 and beyond, of course. But man, that's so cool to hear like the Adrian Peterson story and just like where Jamey started, because I had no idea. So you were just kind of like going out and doing this of your own volition. It wasn't like CBS was like connecting you with these opportunities. Like that side of it is how did that work? Like,
I mean, that was part of I think the selling point for why I got the job. So I was a newspaper writer that happened to be in South Florida. That was a big plus, because we're based in South Florida. So our former boss at the time, Peter Madden, also with a journalistic background as opposed to just being more of a company guy at CBS. I think he liked that aspect of me. I'll never forget the first start sit that I did. I went and I spoke to. Why am I blanking on his name? Man, former running back for the Dolphins and the Eagles. I forget.
Ronnie Brown?
Huh?
No, JJ. It couldn't be JJ.
No,
I said Ronnie Brown.
long before that. He was a high school coach at Atlantic. It'll come to me. At Atlantic High School in South Florida. So my first start of the week was Edgerrin James, and I went and I talked to him just about Edgerrin James. And I just thought like, okay, how can I bring my background to fantasy football? And I know it's influenced Dave, in terms of how Dave likes to, go out and go to camps. That was something that was important to me, trying to, continue to be around at least the Dolphins. And like I said, taking advantage of those interview opportunities. And so, I mean, Dan knows this, I make an effort to go to the Pro Bowl when it's in Orlando. Just because you get a chance to talk to these players. It was a little frustrating this past year with how they did it, but the previous version of it was fantastic. I've been to I think 5 Super Bowls, and really for me the game is awesome, but getting the access to the players on Radio Row and just the people there. I always tell any young reporter or anybody that's in this business and in sports journalism, there is never a person that you could talk to that can't give you something. So we think as fantasy players, I only want to talk to running back, receiver, quarterback, tight end, offensive linemen, fullbacks. They'll tell you the best stuff. One of the best stories I had was at the Pro Bowl, talking to Kyle Juszczyk about Jimmy Garoppolo. He had started the final 3 games of the season there in San Francisco, and he told me, he was like, when he threw it, the sound that the ball made was different. And I'll never forget that quote. And he was so excited to, the Pro Bowls, everybody's chasing the quarterbacks and the star defensive players and all those things. Offensive linemen in an NFL locker room are the best storytellers. They're the best information guys because, nobody always wants to hear their stories, but they just tell you the best information. Fullbacks, defensive players, you can, we're lucky enough at CBS to work with Bryant McFadden, with now Logan Ryan. We've had Darius Butler on our shows this week. Those guys can tell you stuff about offensive players that will help us in our jobs that is invaluable. I mean, Logan, who's just, a Super Bowl removed from the game, he played in the last Super Bowl for the 49ers. He knows Deebo Samuel and what Ricky Pearsall will do in that offense. He was only with them for a brief time. He knows the Bucs and what Todd Bowles wants to do and how that's going to impact the offensive game. So I just found it when I started, Jacob, that if I could do that still and still do my job, then I'm going to do it. And that's the thing I miss, is that I don't have the time to still do those things, So Off season, I try to, take advantage of those situations as much as I can. So owners meetings, going out to some of these trainers, trying to still talk to teams when I can. It's just, something I feel like I want to stay true to who I am.
I think it is still embedded in your analysis from my evaluation of it, just from reading your work and obviously listening to it. And because I think you have one of the better feels for situations in this industry. And situation to me is still a big factor, one of the biggest ones in whether or not this is your player is going to be a fantasy success or a bust in any given week, but also just over the course of a season, year to year. So it's just something interesting. Let's dive into some week 11 stuff, though. So I want to start with something I mentioned earlier, which is your start of the week, which, having edited that column for so many years, I will tell you, I don't have the statistics, but anecdotally speaking, you've had a really good hit rate on these start of the weeks. Some really good streaks involved as well. Let's talk about this week's start of the week, what went into it, and your expectations for that player.
So it's a tough stretch whenever you're in the bye weeks, and Dan knows this, and I think we all try to do this, at least at our company. For CBS is, we stay away from the guys that are started across the board. We stay away from, telling, everybody knows to start Bijan Robinson. We're not going to, set the world on fire by saying, players of that caliber. Finding running backs to start, to tell people to start, thankfully has been tough because everybody's healthy, and all the star players are playing well. And even the mediocre players are playing well. So I try to look for players that are in that gray area or have a chance to maybe pop off or do something special in a good matchup. And, there were a couple of guys that stood out to me this week. Justin Herbert was one. Great matchup. Jared Goff, I think the Lions are going to kill the Jaguars this week. So, he's really the only, Lions player I think that's, somewhat questionable because you're starting everybody else that you know. And then Bo Nix, he's playing well, playing at home. Falcons defense, I think is certainly beatable. Is he going to have like last week was Brock Purdy, which is a little bit more closer to the obvious than Bo Nix, but still people were questioning Brock Purdy because of his lack of consistent fantasy production. I feel like he's not going to do that. He's not going to have a 30-point game, Bo Nix, but 24, 25 points. Get in the middle of the top 10. And for somebody who you're picking up off the waiver wire, that's, I think, exciting for fantasy managers. So you lose Dak Prescott. You don't have Kyler Murray this week. You don't have Baker Mayfield this week. You have some questionable quarterback situations of Mahomes has been struggling and Kirk Cousins in a bad matchup. So to pivot to somebody like Bo Nix, I think is a good move. In the same vein that you would with Justin Herbert or Jared Goff or even Russell Wilson potentially. So there were a handful of quarterbacks this week that sort of fell into that bucket. And for me, I just it's also, again, telling a story. So Jane Daniels is sort of running away with Rookie of the Year. Who's the second best rookie? I mean, you can make a case right now it's Bo Nix. And so to tell his story a little briefly, but make people aware of just the kind of year he's having, I think was fun to do also.
Jacob, if you had to pick a start of the week based on all of your matchup data and everything you've done newsletter wise this week, who would that be?
Let's go with Juwan Jennings. I wasn't ready for this question.
Your boy.
But yeah, he was my boy last week, and we're going back to the well. We'll talk about that later.
Nobody likes Juwan Jennings like Jacob Gibbs, and I don't blame him for that. Digging a little bit into the data you've put out there, Jacob, watching the tape and just considering that situation and the role he's in, I think he's going to be a big factor the rest of the season. But I want to ask you this, Jamey, before we move on past start of the week. Like, has there been any kind of different research resources or any kind of evolution to how you've kind of picked your start of the week? Because I know you mentioned earlier, like you were doing start sit for a while, like early on. What's kind of gone into that process for you?
A lot of it is still the same. The first place that I typically go, I'll tell you what's changed. Vegas has changed for me. Looking at point totals. That's not something I did early on in the process. That's been, over the last couple of years. But a lot of it is, what are the expectations? So for me, like you said, I go by feel, what I see, what I think is going to happen. A lot of it is, we're through 10 weeks of the season in week 11. So there's enough of different data points that you can look at and say, okay, this defense does this, this offense does this player does this. These are the things that you should expect. And so the biggest thing has been, I think just all of the places that accumulate that data has definitely changed. You talked about this before, that there's not a lot of places to find an edge, on what the fantasy, player consumes, and I think the one thing that, is nice about what we do is we've established such a core audience that, you try to build off that. And that's where I think shows like this or doing different things, having fun with it, you want to bring people in a different way because look, you can name 10 podcasts. They're all good. The solo podcast, the group podcasts, the sites that do this, the small sites, the big sites, they're such smart people in this industry. It's just how do you present, the package. And for me, it's just trying to not necessarily be so numbers based. It's, like I said, I like having fun with the revenge narrative. That's a an angle that, is somewhat tongue in cheek when I talk about it, but it's also, why does it work? I don't know.
Yeah,
Players
it
playing
does though.
in their hometown. I'll never forget Hines Ward going back to Atlanta. He was terrible and had a big game that week. Why? He wanted to do well in front of his, hometown fans. It just stupid things like that happen in this league. And you talk to players about it, and they're like, "Yeah, I get up more when I'm playing my farm team. Yeah, I
Yep.
get up more when I'm going back to the place where I grew up because I'm gonna have another 20 or so, people in town." I don't know why
Yeah.
it worked, but sometimes it does.
It does work. It feels like more often than not. It's just like the bloodlines thing. That also seems to work with players coming into the NFL with good bloodlines. Just weird narratives that sometimes play out.
I'm glad you brought up implied totals. I went on Fantasy Pros podcast last week, and somebody in the comments was like, "This guy really likes implied totals." And I realized that I used it for like almost every player, and it's like, yeah, man, Vegas doesn't miss. Like it's real simple, but it's about the most actionable
Sure.
data point you can get any week. And like the one who I've had the most trouble with is one of your starts of the week this week is Bo Nix, because the freaking Broncos applied total is like 19 points every week. This week it's top 10, 23.5, I think. Yeah. So yeah, I've got Bo Nix at QB9. I think that I'm actually lower than consensus. He's at QB7, and like, yeah, I think that's where we're at with him. I loved all those starts of the week, by the way. I love Justin Herbert this week, QB7. We're going to talk about him in more detail later as well. And then we're also going to dive into implied totals for the rest of the year, looking ahead. Yeah, so we've got some cool stuff.
Cool. We're tying that all in. Let's dive into a little bit of week 11 matchups. Looking through some of what Jacob sent me and just some of your rankings, Jamey. Some interesting ranks here. I want to talk a little bit about the Raiders-Dolphins game. I think a lot of people look at that one on the slate and think this could be the spot for potentially to get this Dolphins offense back on track. And by back on track, I mean they've been fine with Tua recently, but not to the extent that we had gotten used to over the last few seasons. Jacob points out that the Raiders are kind of a short pass funnel. So he's thinking maybe it could result in some targets for Achane, maybe the receivers. Do you feel like this is potentially a good week to get Jalen Waddle going or Tyreek Hill? Or what are your thoughts on this matchup?
Every week is a good week to get these guys going. I mean, please get them going. But yes, I think one thing that we probably overlooked a little bit is how good this Arizona defense is. So Tua's first game back and not the big explosive game that we were hoping to see. Arizona coming, this is another narrative that, still sort of holds true is West Coast teams, East Coast, 1:00 start. They tend to have, a little bit of sluggish performances. Arizona's been really good. And, so, okay, you write that off a little bit. Then they go back-to-back road games at Buffalo. That's a good defense, rivalry game. Okay, you expect them to struggle a bit. I think Tua played better than I thought. Obviously, the wide receivers have struggled. The Rams game, and talking about implied totals, it was one of the, Vegas expected to be one of the highest scoring games of the week. It wasn't. Red zone struggles. We saw some turnovers. A lot of field goals for the Rams. This isn't should be a get right spot. I mean, you're at home. The Raiders obviously coming off a bye week should be fresh, should be ready to go. These two teams played down here again, or two teams met down here last year. So that carries some weight a little bit. But yes, the thing I just don't understand is if you're Mike McDaniel, the league has figured you out at this point. The league has taken away the big play. They've taken away what makes your player special. How do you adjust? He didn't adjust when Tua wasn't there. He's not adjusting now. So yes, should there be some opportunities in the short passing game for these guys to get going? I hope so. I don't understand why you went away from what you started last week's game with Jalen Waddle.
Yeah.
Like, give him easy touches. Give Tyreek easy touches. Let them get out in space and make plays. You have elite speed for a reason. Use it. Your right tackle's now gone, and now you're facing Max Crosby. You don't want Tua holding the ball because of a multitude of reasons. So give these guys opportunities to make plays. So I'm more hopeful than saying this will happen. It's just frustrating watching this team right now.
I've got a bunch of data on this matchup. The Raiders have the 5th lowest opponent average depth of target, the 4th lowest opponent first read target rate. So they are kind of keeping the ball out of the hands of the top playmakers when they face opposing offenses. They use a lot of 2 high safety zone coverages. They have the 8th highest running back target rate and the 6th lowest wide receiver target rate. That's all per fantasy points data. So it is, again, another one of these matchups kind of like Arizona that sets up better for Achane and better for Jonnu Smith than Waddle and Tyreek. I have Tyreek at wide receiver 10. I think I'm going to be adjusting that, moving down a little bit because he didn't look quite right to me last week. And I don't love the matchup. And Waddle, I think, is truly a desperation start at this point.
It's painful to hear, but I can't
in a
argue
matchup like this. Jonnu Smith, by the way, leading the entire NFL at the tight end position in first downs per route run. He's tied with HN second on the team in first read target rate in games that Tua has started. He keeps being a big part of the offense, and he's one of the few players who's been able to make explosive plays. I think he's somebody you can start this week.
It's interesting too when I think about it, and we can move on past the Dolphins, but part of the context is like evaluating situations as they evolve within a season. Like this version of the Dolphins offense is very different than what we're used to. And like you said, Jacob, this matchup calls for more of the same, and it might just be that way this year. It might be a situation where they can't rely on what they were doing last year because like Jamey said, they've been figured out. There's a lot of tape on this offense, and Mike McDaniel maybe hasn't adjusted as well. And B, maybe they don't want as much of those like drop back to longer developing route combinations because of Tua's situation. These are all factors that I've considered as I've watched this offense because I thought they would get back on track against the Rams, that secondary, but that just wasn't the case.
I did a Miami-based podcast earlier on Thursday, and the host said, as a Dolphins fan, you take that win because they're trying to get back in playoff contention. As somebody who likes watching football, you hate seeing that game.
Yeah, and you were used to watching good football with McDaniel, but right now that's not the case. What about this? I want to move to this Eagles-Washington matchup that we're about to watch tonight. I saw something from Jacob in the notes as we go over kind of and stay on the theme of implied point totals. Just 22.5 implied point total, for the Eagles tonight. Washington defense has definitely improved. Dan Quinn has a lot of experience coaching against this offense and against Jalen Hurts, former Dallas Cowboys coordinator. Are either of you scared a little bit of your Eagles players, or did you look at last week as kind of like a mini breakout spot for this offense?
To be clear, the 22.5 implied point total was for Washington.
Sorry.
That's who I was a little bit worried about just because
flip the question.
Has played really well.
Been scared of Jaden Daniels, who hasn't looked as good lately on tape, and also that offense hasn't looked as good.
I'm curious to get Jamey's thoughts. The Eagles have been really, really hard to run on. But like with McLaurin, I think he might be a start over Tyreek this week. I'm just curious what he thinks on McLaurin, Jaden, and Washington's offense as a whole.
I'm a little concerned. The way the Eagles have played coming off their bye week, it was a sluggish start, and it was okay. When are they going to figure out Vic Fangio's system? And the secondary has been fantastic. They're doing a great job keeping everything in front of them. The run defense has been absolutely amazing, and so I would love if Jalen Carter turned into football 101 and just eat, sleep, breathe the game. And I'm not saying he doesn't, but just some things you hear. He could be the best interior defensive player in the league. He's got that much skill and that much upside. No offense to your guy Dexter Lawrence, but he could be right there with him. He's just an animal, and you're seeing how these guys are performing. So the nice thing about this game is you don't have to worry about the Washington running backs. It would have been one thing if Brian Robinson did not play, and then you say, okay, I'll buy into Eckler because he'll get enough volume that he should have some opportunities in the passing game, which really we haven't seen in the last few weeks. But still, potential of if they're chasing points, he's still going to get those opportunities. I don't want to trust an injured Brian Robinson, and Robinson's presence impacts Eckler in a little bit of a negative way. So McLaurin, I agree with you, Jacob. He's got still top 10 upside. I hope that there's going to be a lot more volume for him in this game because he's such a skilled route runner. But this defense will do everything possible to keep him in front. And so I don't think we'll see a lot of big plays down the field. So this could be an opportunity. Again, you want to go revenge game narrative, Zach Ertz. We've seen now the last 3 games, 8 targets.
I like Ertz this week.
Yeah.
I hope that he comes into play a little bit, if you're searching for some tight end help. Noah Brown is, sort of a guy you don't want to, buy into, but he'll get, again, opportunities. And I really want to see Jayden Daniels use his legs again. That's kind of been missing for the last couple of weeks. This is a spotlight game. It's an island game. Will he? Not that he needs any, defining moments at this point to establish himself as the rookie of the year. I don't know how much he's still in the MVP race, but you want to show, okay, we made the big move to go get Marshawn Lattimore. We're looking at this is our mountain we have to climb in terms of Philadelphia, and it's going to be on him. And somebody brought this up today that Cliff Kingsbury tends to struggle toward the end of seasons. It's been sort of his MO in college and in Arizona, and we haven't seen the wow factor for the Commanders offense the last few weeks. I wonder if, again, is he struggling to be a little bit more creative? So let's see a few wrinkles tonight and see what happens.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting matchup. Both these teams playoff bound, and both defenses playing better than expected. I wonder if Washington might get exposed tonight. Philadelphia has been playing a little bit better offensively lately. I wonder if we will see the scrambling. No quarterback has rushed for more than 20 yards against Philly this year, and I kind of think it makes sense the way Fangio plays schematically, that it might be limited. And they've faced Deshaun Watson, Baker Mayfield, Daniel Jones, none of those guys top 20 rushing yards. And yeah, Terry, I'm just curious if you guys can give me any insight on Terry McLaurin, because I don't know what to make of this guy, because the volume really isn't like a wide receiver one, yet he's like been the most consistent wide receiver producer in fantasy this year, which is also super uncharacteristic for him. He's been kind of touchdown dependent, which is also strange because Jaden's only thrown for like 9 touchdowns. And so I just don't know what to think of him. Like, is this fluky? I don't really think so, because I think he's really good. I think Jaden's really good. But yeah, I have no idea what to make of him.
I mean, I'll give you my
RPO game is big, for a player like him. So you have so many concerns about what Daniels will do with his legs, what Brian Robinson was doing earlier, what Eckler has done in spurts the last couple of weeks, that you get a player like him in one-on-one matchups. I think he's going to win 9 times out of 10. And the nice thing about it is that based on, I think, years past, you have a quarterback that's giving him opportunities to win with, more accurate passes. So I like the idea of what the next evolution of this team is, and the fact that you're hearing around the league about how many players want to go play in Washington now that the ownership has changed. The coach is somebody that people want to play for. That was the same with when Dan Quinn was in Atlanta. But obviously it's a quarterback, so this is going to be an offense to watch. And for McLaurin, look, he's just a skilled route runner and a great playmaker, and you would just like to see more volume to see how big he can, the heights that he can get to, as a player.
I think my read on it. Well, first I'll say one of the most interesting points I thought you brought up, Jamey, was the point about Cliff Kingsbury's offenses and teams having film to adjust to it, because he's done some different things this year in Washington than he did before, and so maybe that's something we need to concern ourselves with. As far as the McLaurin point goes, Jacob, my main takeaway is this: just from watching a lot of Jayden Daniels at LSU and now in the NFL, because I've watched almost all of his games on tape. He's one of the more accurate red zone passers that I've seen come into the NFL in a really long time. And his release is so lightning quick and compact and just beautiful that it helps in those short confined spaces like the red zone. So while it does seem fluky and maybe we should be predicting some kind of touchdown regression, I almost go the other way. I think he's so good in the red zone that if this team can really get the rest of their offense going, he'll have even more opportunities, Terry McLaurin. So I'm still high on him as we move forward.
That's what I'm kind of thinking, is like, if he gets half the touchdowns, what if we just start throwing for 2 touchdowns per game instead of 0.7 touchdowns per game or whatever it's been? Okay, so I want to figure out where we're at with CeeDee Lamb, personally, because I have CeeDee Lamb everywhere.
I know you're making
I have too much CeeDee Lamb.
Been trying to trade him to Jamey, no bite.
Wants him.
So he's got a rough matchup this week against Houston. Houston has tough corners, a lot of pressure they're going to put on the opposing quarterback, whoever that ends up being for Dallas. The Texans have the lowest catchable ball rate allowed in terms of the percentage of the targets that are catchable. Part of that is because teams throw really deep often against this Houston defense. But yeah, I like, is he outside of the top 24 at this point? Like, where do we put Lamb?
I have him, I think, around 15. And this is where I think a lot of fantasy analysts and fantasy players that don't just rely on numbers fall into traps, because you just said it. This matchup is not good for him. His quarterback right now is not good for him. But he's such a special player. And we know that he's going to still get opportunities. I mean, what do you have? 10 targets in the game last week against Philadelphia. Philadelphia's defense, to me, is better than Houston's defense right now. Season long numbers notwithstanding, what they've done post bye week. Granted, some of it's been against some awful quarterbacks, but I buy into the talent and I buy into the coordinator. I do think that this is going to be some opportunities for CeeDee Lamb to have chances to win. And if you go back to 2022, Cooper Rush was not awful for CeeDee Lamb. He's a better receiver now. I don't know if Cooper Rush is a better quarterback. Didn't look that way in his first start. But also the offensive line was better. The run game was better. Everything was better in Dallas. So the supporting system the environment was a lot better for everybody involved. So I can't imagine, and Jacob, you could speak to this, and Dan, you just said you have a lot of CeeDee Lamb. When you guys go to set your lineups, yes, it's easy to say Jawan Jennings over CeeDee Lamb because he's in a good spot and his quarterback is great and the system's great. His environment is better. If you play in a 3-receiver league, it's very difficult to bench CeeDee Lamb. It's difficult to bench Tyreek Hill. It's difficult to bench these guys that have the one play upside, the one play potential. And so this is where you get either caught up in the numbers or caught up in the player and caught up in draft value, all those things that go into where I took this guy, I can't possibly bench him, all those things that we know fantasy players struggle with. So are you benching CeeDee Lamb? I'll turn it right back on you. Are you in your own teams, whatever the numbers tell you, whatever the circumstances say, can you really sit here and say I'm going to bench CeeDee Lamb?
I would love to, but all my receivers are hurt.
Right.
But if you maybe have some healthy receivers, here are some guys who I have ranked ahead of CeeDee Lamb. Cortland Sutton.
Yep.
I think, we already talked about the matchup there for Denver. Josh Downs, I'm curious what you guys think about the matchup against the Jets. The Jets defense is the worst tackling unit in the NFL, has only looked worse since Robert Saleh's gone. Josh Downs, obviously a good tackle breaker. Mostly will avoid Sauce Gardner, Ahmad Gardner. I guess we can't call him Sauce anymore. That's what I heard. I think it's a matchup where we could still see a good game from Downs. The Jets actually use a lot of man coverage this year. All 3 Colts receivers have been sick against man coverage. Like, I'm kind of excited to see what it's like without Michael Pittman there. Like A.D. Mitchell, this is absurd. A.D. Mitchell's run 55 routes versus man coverage, has been targeted on 22 of them. That's 49% for anybody counting. Really, really nuts. Him, Alec Pierce, Josh Downs, all much better splits versus man. But of course, it comes down to Anthony Richardson and the New York Jets pass rush, and that's where I get scared. But Downs, I think, is the one easy button who should be consistent in any given matchup. He did play well the last time he had Richardson. Ladd McConkey, I think you could start ahead of CeeDee Lamb. I know it's been rough lately, but I do think the chart is going to be passing a lot more. Jaden Reed, and then I want to talk about the Atlanta receivers. What are we doing with this matchup against Denver? So for what it's worth, Drake London's slot rate just keeps going up. 50% last week, highest it's ever been. So I think he will, at least on half of his routes, avoid Patrick Surtain. The slot coverage in Denver is good too. I mean, they're just good everywhere. It's been such a brutal matchup. Where do you guys land on London and Mooney this week?
So just real quick, I think that's, before we get to that, just the CeeDee Lamb stuff, you're going to do something that most people won't do and start those guys over Lamb. And that's where you win your week or you lose your week. And again, it's not just you as an analyst. That's your process. That's what a lot of people struggle with. They're like, man, I can't sit that guy. He was my first round pick. He's quarterback proof. Of course not. He's going to have a good game. He's going to 10. The sun was in his eyes. We catch a touchdown. Everybody's happy with CeeDee Lamb.
He's playing in Dallas again. The sun could be there.
But not, unfortunately, he's not Dave Richard. He can't play it through the sun.
So there's lots of things at play there. And I love your answer. You gave great points on why those players should have a better opportunity than CeeDee Lamb. And we'll see how that plays itself out. I don't think most people, unfortunately, listen to us when we say things like this. That's the nature of what people do.
He's also playing hurt right now too, Lamb. Like, we got to consider that as well. He's playing through an injury.
Right. Yeah. Shoulder injury is certainly a big part of this. I'm concerned with the Falcons guys. The slot rate numbers are definitely important for Drake London. We have seen Surtain at times, follow guys into the slot, not as much recently as he did earlier this year. And this is a tricky one because, when you have not just a guy like Drake London, let's give Darnell Mooney his credit. He's I saw the NFL Network, making a push for, under the radar Pro Bowl guys. He's having that type of season. He's certainly been great for fantasy managers, top 20 wide receiver. Will they just leave him on one side and say, okay, you're going to cover that guy that's there, whether it's Mooney or whether it's London? So it just feels as if this is a bad spot for the Falcons passing game, because Cousins has had trouble in these type of situations. When he's facing secondary, they can give him some different coverage and different looks.
Pressure too. He's a statue right now.
Yeah. So I just wonder if we can get a game like we got last week, where Cousins struggles and the receivers are still, solid, especially if you play in PPR like most of us do. London's been great at finding the end zone. His, red zone production has been awesome. Can he keep that up? Does he score? If he scores, you're probably happy with it, no matter really what the overall numbers look like, because at least you got that against Surtain. But you just look at the big physical receivers that have faced Denver this season. Metcalf struggled. Evans struggled. Garrett Wilson struggled. Hopkins, whose slot rate was improving, or at a decent rate by comparison to some of those guys. Great. Who was the guy that beat them up this year? It was the smaller, shifty slot receiver in Zay Flowers, who Surtain never saw. So I just think you play the percentages here, and for me, it's Surtain locks up this type of guy. So I would try to sit him, but you said it, Jacob. Most of us don't have enough healthy bodies. 4 teams on a bye can afford to sit Drake London. So he's still a top 24 receiver for me, but he's been a top 10 guy, almost every week this season.
I have London at wide receiver 15, which is lower than he's been all year for me.
Yeah.
I have Mooney at wide receiver 24. For what it's worth, Mooney does move around a lot. He has a 40% slot rate. It's shrunk a little bit as London has occupied that role more and more, but he does move around a lot. So I'm not too worried. I don't necessarily think we're going to see Surtain like follow him or anything like that. Right. We'll see. One guy who I think you could consider starting, basically everyone that I said earlier, I would start ahead of Mooney. Another one who I haven't mentioned is Cedric Tillman. Do you guys have any thoughts on him, Jameis, and the Browns?
I could be easily talked into Cedric Tillman as a play for this week. Just given the rapport I've seen him build with Jameis Winston, his tape, which has been phenomenal. He wins at all 3 levels. Bye week could be a situation where they found even more time to work on getting him the football and designing plays for him specifically. So I like that call.
Over CeeDee Lamb?
I could. Yeah. I mean, look, for Lamb, for me, I'm really nervous about a lot of different things. But like when you're playing through a shoulder injury for a team that's basically out of the playoffs and has said some weird things like Micah Parsons that almost make you feel like I don't want to say quit on the coach, but are certainly not feeling like they're in playoff contention. Are you going to be as interested in leaning into contact if you're CeeDee Lamb, trying to make crazy plays after the catch? Because I agree, some of his plays have been him and Dak connecting from a rapport standpoint in the deep half. Some of them have been after the catch. He's been an amazing after the catch receiver for his entire career dating back to Oklahoma. So does all that happen when you're playing through a shoulder injury on a team that's dead? Like, I don't know. So I don't really know where the points come from for Lamb, with the exception of just, that one big play that Jamey mentioned. So I'd rather lean on somebody like Tillman, who I think is going to have a lot more volume and be targeted at better areas of the field.
All right, let's wrap up the matchups here with some flex plays. Some guys you might even be able to get on your waiver wire. Try to come up with a name. I'm going to give a few here. Dan, let's see if you can give us a Tutu Atwell call of the week. So AD Mitchell, I already mentioned. I really like the matchup here. He's been creating tons of separation all year. And we know that Anthony Richardson is is willing to stand in and take deep shots to him. So I think he's somebody who brings sneaky upside. You might be able to get off the waiver wire. Another one, I'm stealing this from Dan, Kayshon Boutte.
Oh, my boy.
The new wide receiver 1 for the Patriots. He's a really talented guy. He was somebody who I guess had some character problems or some concerns for teams. But if he sorted that out, like, he has the talent to be a contributor, and they're trusting him to be the top receiver lately. I love Drake May. Matchup against the Rams could be exciting. The Rams bring a lot of volatility because they create so much pressure, but they can be got in the secondary. And May has been really good against pressure this year. So if he's able to extend plays, Boutte's somebody who might find down the field. I think the chemistry has been developing with those two. And then the Browns, man. I really do. The Browns are about to have a really, really brutal run of matchups, but this week is one that I think that they could put some points on the board. Really love the matchup for Nick Chubb. He's had some brutal matchups, but I think this is a spot he could get going. And the Jerry Jeudy, somebody that people just kind of have left for dead. His volume numbers are right up there with Tillman. Like, he's playing a ton and getting targets, getting air yards. I think this is a matchup he could do well in as well with no Marshawn Lattimore.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Jamey speak in a second if he has any guys that he likes for flex, his call of the week, maybe a flex type play. You took one of mine, Booty, but I got another one, and I actually noticed you actually mentioned him in the notes as well, but you didn't just mention him here, and that's Quentin Johnston for the Chargers. So I actually this week went back and watched every single passing snap for the Chargers this season, and one thing that I noticed within their scheme, they like to use Quentin Johnston a lot on these rail routes, which are essentially just like almost like vertical routes up the sideline. And the reason they're using him there is because of two things. One, their scheme is so run heavy and play action heavy that the spacing of the defense allows for just a lot of space on the perimeter for these wide receivers in that kind of role. And that's Quentin Johnston. And two, a lot of these are on the backside of plays. So the play side is like if quarterback snaps the ball, he looks to one side of the field. That's where his first read is, and that's the play side. But Justin Herbert, from watching his tape, I don't know if any quarterback in the NFL has been better at coming off the play side and going to the backside of a play and understanding where that space will be and then delivering the football. And Quentin Johnson has had so many free touchdowns and big plays from just running up the rail and getting the football from a quarterback like Herbert. I think that's going to continue as we go through the year because teams aren't going to adjust differently because they need to take away this run game first because that's what the offense is based in. That's the whole scheme. So I love Quentin Johnson pretty much as the rest of the way. And this is a good spot for him, as you talked about a little bit earlier, Jacob, just from a matchup standpoint. So he'd be my favorite flex.
I like that. I'll stay with the same team. You need a tight end. Will Dissly, 18 pass attempts last week for Justin Herbert, 6 targets go to Dissly. I think he's been 8 or 9 PPR, 8 PPR points or more in 3 of his last 4 games. Go back to Vegas. They're saying this could be a shootout between these two teams, and really, I think it's going to be the Cincinnati hold up their end of the bargain because that will determine, I think, which Chargers offense we see. It's been tough to run on Cincinnati lately since they got their defensive front healthy. So we could see back to the volume for Justin Herbert. You don't want to see 14 of 18. You want to see back to 32 plus pass attempts, which feeds into McConkey, which feeds into Quinn Johnson. But Dissly, should have had a touchdown last week. Drop one.
Right.
If he catches that, we're probably talking about him as one of the best streamers for this week. So, Jacob mentioned Jonnu Smith. I'll still throw Dawson Knox out there. There is a report while we were talking that Amari Cooper says he feels healthy enough to play, so that is a positive for the Bills and Josh Allen. Just one thing to keep in mind with A.D. Mitchell. Michael Pittman reportedly practiced in full on Wednesday. So
yeah.
And I'm with you. I'd rather see the younger guys at this point than Pittman gimping it around with a back injury, from what we saw last week with Pearson and Mitchell. But in any event, I think Will Dissly is not a bad pivot play. If you're missing Trey McBride this week, for example, or Kate Otten, to find some volume there for him. Hopefully the same.
Yeah, I love those calls. All right. We promised the producers we try to keep this under 50. It doesn't look likely, but let's do some rapid fire to close this out because we did also promise that we'd look into some Vegas look ahead lines to close out the show. So we're going to play a quick game with both of you, and I'll let you guys decide who wants to go first. I'm going to give you a look ahead line, a point implied points total rest of season for a team, and you could say if that's just right, too high of an implied points total, or too low. So we'll start with the 49ers, who have scored the 9th most points per game. They're projected rest of season to score the 2nd most points per game. Is that just right, too high, or too low, Jamey?
Juwan Jennings, league winner.
Yeah, I would say just right. They're healthy, aside from Ayuk, but Jennings is, I think, gonna do similar things for that offense that Ayuk was doing. McCaffrey's back. Yeah, it would not surprise me, no.
Jacob?
You know where I'm at. Me and Adam got the bet in. I'm smarter than Adam, clearly. 49ers 2nd. Ravens, I think, we're 5th. Come on.
I love it. I'm with you guys. I think it's just right. I think it's going to be one of the best offenses for fantasy football the rest of the way. The Dolphins have scored the 29th most points per game this year, which is wild to think about. Their implied total is the 8th most points per game rest of season. Where are you guys at on that one?
Feels too high, but there's your hopium if you are looking for it, Waddle people.
I would say it's too high. If you would say 15, that I might buy with the, again, hope. They just lost their right tackle.
Yeah.
They're always a Tua injury away from this offense going in the tank, so I would take the under.
I'm with you guys on that one as well. Let's see if we can find a disagreement here. I don't think we will. This one seems crazy to me. The Jets have scored the 26th most points per game this year. I believe Zach Wilson scored more points last year with this team. without Devontae Adams. And now they're projected to have the 10th most points per game the rest of the season. Vegas loves the Jets. They're like favorites in this game. They just love this team, and they have all year. Are you with Vegas on this rest of the season? Is too high, too low, or just right, Jamey?
It's too high, but the schedule's great. That's the one thing I think you look at and you say, okay, there are so many winnable matchups for their guys, for their offense. Not a lot of scenarios where Rodgers should, struggle, but it's still the Jets, and you wonder if they're a loss away from shutting things down for him. He's already talking about trying to come back for next year. Is he going to want to risk an injury after what happened to him last season? So, yeah, I would take the under on that.
Jacob?
Seems too high, but yeah, we've been talking about the schedule for a long time. Brees Hall, Garrett Wilson. I'm not quite as confident in Rodgers and Adams just because they could be shutting it down, but the schedule is real nice, and this is a clear example right here of just how nice.
Yeah, I don't know with this stupid team. I watch them and I just don't understand them. The scheme is so bad on offense. They're just not doing a lot of the things that a lot of teams have done. And Rodgers, to me, looks a step slower from a processing standpoint. And that was clear in his final season with Green Bay. I didn't think it would carry over, but it has. So I'm going to say this is too high. Rams have scored the 22nd most points per game. Obviously spent a lot of the season without Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. They're projected rest of the way for the tied with the Jets for the 10th most points per game. Is that too high, too low, or just right? I'll start with you this time, Jacob.
I love it. The offensive line is finally healthy. It did not play very well last week, but I also think you got to give some credit to Miami's defense is playing exceptional. Rams have a lot of potential shootouts going forward. The offense is all intact. I love it. I think we could see some huge totals for Puka and for all these guys.
As Dan would say on the mailbag, I agree.
Yep, and I agree as well. I could think top 10 is well within the realm of possibility. And the only person I think can hold them back from that is actually Sean McVay and his conservatism in the red zone and on fourth downs. That's the only thing that worries me. The Bucs, a favorite of Beyond the Box Score for Jacob and I, mostly because we love offensive coordinator Liam Cohen and what he's done there schematically. They've scored the 5th most points per game this season, but rest of season, they're projected to score the 22nd most points per game. Is that, and we'll start with you this time, Jamey, is that too high, too low, or just right?
It's too low. They're getting Mike Evans back hopefully after their bye week. Schedule is fantastic, certainly for their running game. So hopefully we get a little bit more production from one of Rashad White or Bucky Irvin. I would lean toward Irving just because I think he's a little bit more explosive. I hope Kate Otten does not slow down, but from a team perspective, yes, this is too low.
This highlights what we've talked about with Mike Evans, where there's upside for him from a matchup perspective to just crush the secondaries he's about to face. But the concern is that they won't need to because they're playing such bad teams.
Yeah.
The implied over-under remaining for the Bucs is one of the lowest in the NFL. And so that's like the combined points between the teams. Only the Saints, Giants, Panthers, Broncos, and Patriots have a lower remaining over-under per game. And that, I think, just speaks to the fact that, like, these are probably not going to be high-scoring games. It's probably going to be games where the Bucs can control the game on the ground. And so I think Bucky is probably the biggest winner here. And it does make the range of outcomes wider a bit, like a more thin bet that you're placing on like Mike Evans in terms of needing to throw the ball down the field.
Interesting. I like that. I wasn't really considering that. The matchups are playing a role in this, and we have to definitely consider that. I know they play the Giants rest of the season. That at some point this season, so that should be a low-scoring game. I think that's right coming out of the bye week. Okay, we'll wrap up here with the Steelers, a team that Vegas has always implied to not score a lot of points for whatever reason. They've scored the 11 most points this year, a lot. They've been better, but they're projected rest of way for 28th most points. They're projected to be one of the lowest scoring teams in the NFL. I'll start with you this time, Jamey. Just right, too high, or too low?
I think those are the categories. Yes. It's too low. I don't think they're going to be world beaters. The schedule's tough. It's really, really tough. And watching some of what Russell Wilson did last week, for example, he's getting so lucky with the shots down the field. And that's not sustainable. Like Dan Quinn should have fired himself last week for blitzing it on the Mike Williams touchdown. Like what are you doing? He's either going to
Crazy.
He's gonna move in the pocket somewhere where you should be able to still create pressure on him, but don't give him free shots down the field where he gets clean looks on design rollouts. I don't think it's sustainable. We know what this run game has been the last couple of years, and I know Arthur Smith is great at opening up running lanes, and Najee's having a good stretch, but I don't think that's sustainable either. So 20 to 22, I think, is probably realistic. 28 seems a little bit too low because you factor in the the moon ball here or there, and Pickens is so good. But yeah, I would not take the over by a lot.
What was really interesting to me about Pittsburgh is that they are underdogs in every single game except for one against the Browns. And so we've got games where, like this week in Baltimore, against Baltimore, for example, they could put up a big passing number. I think this is a really, really bad note for Najee Harris. But for the passing game, I'm still kind of intrigued. Baltimore, chasing points there at Cincinnati in week 13, and then at Philadelphia in week 15, at Baltimore again in week 16, then the Chiefs in week 17. Those are all games where they could be trailing by double digits, and we could see 30, 40 pass attempts from Russ Wilson.
I hope so. Such a brutal schedule.
Yeah, they've had a brutal schedule, really, or projected brutal schedule for most of the season. They've overcome a lot of it, but it'll be interesting.
Well, now
to
they're playing their division, though. They haven't done that
now.
yet.
They finally have to play their division, right? And I think it's interesting the point you made about Najee, just given the fact that he's playing through an injury and those implied point totals and the matchups. Maybe it's finally Jaylen Warren's season. He looked better to me from what I've seen.
If they're passing a lot more, that makes sense. Like that's clearly been his role. Can I wrap up real quick with the Chargers? This will only be a minute or two.
Yes.
The average over-under for the Chargers games in 2024 on the year is 40.1 points. So 40 points. For reference, this week, there's one game in the entire NFL that has a lower over-under. The Titans and Vikings is at 39.5. The average for Chargers games is 40. The highest over-under of any Chargers game to this point is 44.5. The defense has played really well, but they've also just played terrible teams. And so we're going, I hate to call any NFL team terrible. That's, you get what I'm saying relatively, but like, we're going to see like what this defense is really made of over the next month. Sure. And it could be really interesting. It could lead to some real shootouts. So I said the average is 40, the highest is 44.5 so far. Here are the over-unders for the next few matchups for the Chargers: 47, 47, 48, 45, 43, 43, 41 to close things out. So the next 4 or 5 weeks, they got Cincinnati, Baltimore, Atlanta, Kansas City, then Tampa Bay. Those could all be shootouts. And we really haven't seen any shootouts. And I think that's really important for Disley. If you believe in him, will first read target Disley. 41% first read target rate last week. I don't know. It's absolutely insane. Ladd McConkey is wide receiver 14 in fantasy points per route run on the year. There just haven't been that many routes because they're winning and they're running. And I don't know if they're going to be able to control games on the ground so easily going forward. Justin Herbert, QB 12 in fantasy points per dropback. And that's with pretty poor luck on converting touchdowns. He's running more than we've ever seen. Greg Roman is using him more as a rusher. We saw Jim Harbaugh was just like so psyched about that goal line touchdown last week for Herbert. I'm honestly obsessed with the Chargers and Harbaugh and Herbert and everything. It's so fun right now. And so, yeah, I'm just like looking at this schedule. We've been saying, buy McConkey basically all year. But if you can get one of these guys now, I think this might be like the jumping off point where it's only just like big totals from this point on until the last couple of weeks are kind of rough. Like fantasy championship, they're in New England. Like it's going to be 10 degrees. That's going to be terrible. But yeah, it's exciting times for LA. I think it could be really fun.
This is the best I've personally seen Justin Herbert look on tape in his entire career. He's really taken well to, I don't want to say as much Greg Roman. I think Jim Harbaugh's played a big role in it as well. And he's just healthy and he's processing things fast in this offense. So I'm excited to watch this play out. For everyone else, thank you so much for tuning in to Beyond the Box Score. Thank you so much for supporting us by hitting that like button and subscribing. We need your help. Do it. It takes a second. Roll your hand over that mouse, scroll it over and click like. It's only going to take you 3.5 seconds to do, but it's really going to help us grow the show. Jamey, thank you so much for joining us today. For everyone else, have a great rest of your weekend or week, and we'll talk to you soon.